So the first person I'd like to ask to speak is Yannis Gourtsoyannis, who's a junior doctor who's been at the forefront of he works at UCH. He's been leading this battle in lots of ways and is on the BMA negotiating committee as well. So, yeah.
I'll just correct me first of all, I'm not on the negotiating committee, I'm on the Junior Doctors Committee, on the executive of that. So thanks for having me here. I'm going to start off with a quote, the provenance of which no doubt all of you will be familiar with. And that is, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And that well-known sentence perfectly encapsulates the present situation within which we, the BMA, find ourselves. On the 12th of January, last Tuesday, we went on strike for the first time in 40 years. Now, the consequences of that day and the consequences of current negotiations and possible future action in February will stretch far, far into the future. As you've heard, the very viability of the NHS as a publicly funded, publicly provided institution is at stake here. Now, of course, over the last few months and in the coming few months, the BMA's strength and resolve as a union is being tested. And it's my view, and I'd love to hear your views to the contrary, it's my view that we are passing that test. We had a very, very successful first day of industrial action. The vast majority of those who voted for industrial action took part in the strike action. Public support was overwhelming. The pickets at every hospital, basically, in England ran smoothly. The government is therefore now, in my view, on the back foot. Some concessions are being made. Strikes do work. Now, as you will be aware, next week's action, proposed action, has been suspended. However, February, depending entirely on whether or not the government chooses to play fair, February could be a very interesting month. Our proposed action for the 10th of February remains fully in place. This battle won't be won on the back of one single day of action. We know that. And don't get me wrong. When I'm referring to the BMA, I'm not referring to it as some sort of abstract entity separate from developments in wider society. It's not an organisation which will ultimately bear sole responsibility for success or failure in this fight. We won't win or lose this on our own. And the BMA will neither hand its members victory or betray its members' hopes. No, on the contrary, when I'm referring to the BMA struggle, I'm also referring to the massive upswell of grassroots mobilisation amongst junior doctors. I'm talking about a new mass movement, potentially. And we've seen that back in October, the biggest street protest by junior doctors ever, and potentially we'll be seeing a repetition of that in February and even in April. And I'm also talking about us as individual doctors, with all of our hopes, fears, illusions and frustrations, and how we are learning about what it means to engage in an industrial dispute. And we're learning, of course, from many of you too. We're also finding valuable support from our allied health worker colleagues, and we are in turn offering them our support in turn. Over the last few months too, I and some others in the BMA have been in dialogue with many trade unionists, many activists, some of whom I met here at a previous Unite the Resistance event. As a result of that dialogue, we've had public statements of support from many trade unions around the country, and I'd like to especially thank Wrack and the firefighters for an incredibly moving letter of support which they gave to us on the day of our strike ballots results. And beyond those valuable words of support, we were also, as a profession, incredibly moved to see fellow workers, fellow NHS workers, activists, trade unionists, local residents, patients and patient relatives turning up at our pickets and giving us visible support, shaking our hand and bringing a smile too. So the overwhelming support which we experienced on that first day of action was incalculable, and it's really filled us with confidence going forward. It was the perfect antidote to the cynicism and vicious and misleading lies perpetrated by the right-wing press in the few days before the first day of action. It's clear, I think, to most people in this room, as well as the wider working class, that Hunt's proposed doctor's contract is, amongst other things, a tool for achieving the destruction of safe terms and conditions throughout the NHS and throughout the public sector. And it's also become clear to many of us who were not of this view before, that there are certain sections of the press which see themselves simply as nothing more than a coercive arm of David Cameron's state. It became evident that when we NHS workers were starting to seize the public narrative, when it became evident that we were willing to deploy industrial action, and when it looked like we had the mass support of the British public, those sections of the media mobilised in a systematic way against us. Their headline smears, their diligent trawling through our Facebook accounts, their uninvited appearances at our family homes and at our places of work, and their targeting of BMA members who are or had ever been members of the Labour Party. All of these tactics had one aim, and their aim was to put fear into us, the paralysing fear that we were about to lose public support. But the public is with us, as multiple polls have shown over the last few months, and they will remain with us as long as we are forthright and make the necessary political arguments over the coming months, over the coming year. As long as we're honest, and as long as we do not let those sections of the media terrify us into censoring ourselves or seeing the world through the eyes of Murdoch and the rest. Finally, I would ask you, please do not underestimate how tough a position we are in. We're nowhere near halfway through this whole battle. Why are we in a tough position? Because in my view, our negotiations with Jeremy Hunt have been triple locked. Or to use another metaphor, Jeremy Hunt has erected 3 safety barriers around his position, through which we as a union and as a movement need to break through. The first of his safety barriers is the so-called November offer, the DDRB recommendations. These are a deeply pernicious set of recommendations for our future contracts, and we are making some good progress in breaking through that November offer in the course of negotiations on the back of the industrial action. The second of Jeremy Hunt's safety barriers, however, remains intact. He retains the threat of imposition, of imposing a contract upon us by August 2016. We will not let that happen. And the third of Hunt's safety barriers is the so-called cost neutrality of the overall doctor's pay envelope. This cost neutrality, of course, at the same time as Jeremy Hunt attempts to stretch the NHS into an elective 7-day service and alongside the biggest squeeze of NHS funds in its history. So, cost neutrality plus supposed expansion to a 7-day service plus a reduction in overall funds equals austerity. And that battle, the battle against austerity, will not, of course, be won by the BMA alone. Every concerned citizen and every trade unionist, every activist organisation will need to play its part. And the end game of that battle against austerity will be fought over the NHS. So if we as health workers stand up for ourselves, for our NHS, who will stand with us? I think you will, and you already have. Thank you very much.
Yannis, and there will be a chance. I'll take a couple more speakers, and then if people want to come in with questions or contributions, I'll do that after the next couple of speakers. But the next person to speak is Danielle Tiplady. She's a student nurse from King's College, and she's been one of the people who helped organise the fantastic demonstration in January, and she's here to tell us about their fight against the cuts to their bursaries.
So it's really nice to be here with you all today. I know some of you, but some of you I don't. So sorry to bore the ones that know about me, but I'm going to go through a story about myself again. So I'm 29, and before going to university I worked as a healthcare assistant with the elderly. During this time I was so shocked by how ill people could get. Like, I was really naive that people could get that sick. But within minutes I saw the nurses and how they cared for the patients and how they made them live beyond their illness, and that in about 5 minutes, that was it. I wanted to be a nurse. So I went and completed an access course and gained all distinctions and a place here in London at King's College, which is the proudest moment of my life. 2 things have made this possible, which is my own hard work and my NHS bursary. I've been very fortunate with my experiences and opportunities since becoming a nursing student. From watching open heart surgery, to doing homeless nursing, to being the person who is privileged enough to hold a patient's hand in their final moments, to working in a West London trauma centre in accident and emergency. I feel A&E sums up my main issues with this country. You have the patients who repeatedly come back as they've got nowhere to live due to the benefit cuts. The patient who tried to commit suicide because they've had the bedroom tax cuts inflicted. The elderly patient who's fallen and wasn't found for hours due to cuts in social care. The list can go on and on and on. Then you have the nurses, demoralised, burnt out and not able to have a break in a 12.5-hour shift. The nurses who want to leave the profession. The nurses who once, like me, had a real passion and wanted to be a nurse. This is something, as students, we are faced with on a daily basis. Then you've got the students who are watching our colleagues struggling, worn out. We're watching the junior doctors being so unsure of their future and worried about patient safety. To me, it feels like we're all being set up to fail, and they're going to sell it off piece by piece. These students are now also faced with the reality that one day I will look after a student that will pay £64,000 to train in London to be a nurse and work 2,300 hours. To then pay this back from a salary which is capped at a 1% rise over the next 4 years, and nurses have not had a proper pay rise in a very, very long time. The removal of the bursary marks the complete death of state support for further education. It also removes the chance for those who care to train as a nurse, with only those who can afford to do so. Don't be fooled by the apprenticeship route into nursing either, because this just means that the poor can stay and work in the hospitals for £3, while your rich friends can do the degree and they can leave the country and they can keep the poor working in the hospitals. They've recommended this despite best evidence saying that degree-educated nurses, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but nursing is developed into like really technical skill and knowledge. And with degree-educated nurses, patient mortality is 7% less. The idea to charge us is ludicrous. They say there will be 10,000 more places. We've got 10,000 less nurses in London. Who is going to train these students? They've scrapped the safe staff in. Like, who is going to train them and look after patients effectively? This is what led me to start the NHS bursary campaign. We started with a demo in December, which had 500 people, and a couple of weeks ago, 5,000 of you marched with us through London. The campaign support and momentum has been incredible. We've been working closely together, and we've decided on a week of action starting on the 8th of February. This will begin on the Monday with Monument Monday, and we're going to go and hang banners on famous monuments in London. Then we will have Tweet Tuesday with Hunt Must Go as our hashtag. And then on the Wednesday, we're going to do something that student nurses haven't done for a very, very long time. We are going to walk out of our placements for 1 hour at 10 o'clock in the morning and withdraw our labour. This is not a lunch break. This is us. Isn't just for the bursary, this is to defend our junior doctors and to defend our NHS. We ask for your support with this. If you can send the motion to your union, I think there's some here, and we've got leaflets as well. We'll be making more leaflets to go out on the ground and give to people. We really, really need your help with this, so it would be great if you could. We'll have more information to follow about it all soon. We're working on it this weekend because we've all got essays and boring dissertations to write at the same time. We're also going to do on one of those days some direct action, but I'm not going to say too much more about that. We'll keep you all in suspense. And I think from highlighting the issues that we have, for example, in A&E, is with health, with homes, with education, with cuts to the most vulnerable and needy in society. And I will also ask you, on the 16th of April to come and march with the People's Assembly with their March for Health, Homes and Education. So, thank you.
And our next speaker needs no introduction, I'm sure, is Wrack from the FIGHTBACK, who, as I say, is one of the people who's been really fighting to try and get us a real strategy for taking on the trade union bill. So.
Comrades, brothers and sisters, it's a great pleasure to speak and to give support to workers in the NHS, trying to defend, I think, one of the institutions that really is a potential focal point for a huge struggle against this government, that if we were able to defeat them on, would actually open up the doors to a whole number of other areas where we could defeat them also. And Yannis made reference to some of the witch hunting attacks on some of those involved in organising the Junior Doctors campaign and action. And if you read the media and you listen to the press, you would imagine that workers are somehow hoodwinked into going on strike, and that they're also gullible. All it takes is a few activists who can somehow con people, and people walk out of the door on strike. And that's why they target activists or union leaders in those circumstances. And of course the truth is very, very different, because the decision to go on strike for any group of workers is an extremely difficult decision. Because apart from anything else, you lose pay. And most people can't afford to lose a day's pay, or 2 days' pay, or week's pay, or whatever it takes to take that strike action. So the idea that if for any group of workers in any industry, in the private or the public sector, the decision to go on strike is an easy one is a complete lie. And the idea, therefore, that they can be con-tricked into it by a group of activists is also a complete lie. We then look at areas of the public services, like the NHS, and I think the idea that people go into those sorts of areas of work in order to go on strike because they want to create trouble, whatever, again, is ludicrous. And the truth is this: despite all those witch hunting attacks, the majority of people in this country realise that the people who do those jobs in our public services actually deserve the respect, and the vast majority of people do have huge respect for those workers who deliver our NHS. And that's why time and time and again, when you see struggle, you will see that huge public support. We've seen it in the fights. I've seen some people who I've had my career with, who on the image, on the face of it, would look like big, burly, tough guys, walking out on strike in tears, because they know that actually it is a very serious step to take. And then you think about the thought process that goes through people's heads when they make those decisions, and they are weighing up what is the damage that is being done to me and to my profession and to my service against the damage that I might do in trying to fight back. And on every occasion, those people have gone through that. These are intelligent, thoughtful people who go through that process and say, actually, the best way to defend our public services is not to allow them to rob our pensions, or to attack our wages, or to destroy our duty systems, or whatever it is. The best way to actually stand up for decent public services is also to demand decent conditions of work for those people who work in and who deliver those public services as well. So we should make, across our movement, no apologies of giving full support to NHS workers, including the junior doctors, in any action they choose to take, including the strike action they've already taken. So then we have to look at what lies behind these. There's a big debate around austerity. We're all living through, I mean, this is the most horrendous period in the history of my union in terms of the cuts and attacks that we are facing. We have never in our history seen the scale of job losses, of cuts and closures, and on all at the same time that our living standards have not recovered from the 2007-2008 economic crisis, that our pensions across the public services have been attacked and have been robbed. And yet there is no let up at all. The government has already said, for those of us in the public services, that we face another 4 years of falling living standards. And what a gauntlet to throw down to the trade unions. Are we actually going to do something about that, or are we going to let them get away with it? Because alongside that, what we're seeing is a complete restructuring of our public services. And despite everything that they claim, the agenda is to privatise more and more of our public services, or go even further, as they want to do in areas like my own, of encouraging more and more volunteering to replace professional people delivering public services. You'll have seen the floods over the Christmas and New Year period. Thousands of firefighters on the front line of saving thousands of lives and protecting tens of thousands of people in communities. And David Cameron could not bring himself to utter the word firefighter on any of his visits to Cumbria or York or anywhere else. He wanted to shake the hands of the military and others and the volunteers, but he did deliberately avoid actually addressing the people who made up the vast majority of the workforce dealing with that. And why is that? It's because they hate us. And they hate us because we are well organised and we're a trade union, and we will not back down on being a trade union and being well organised and for our condition of service. But they want to shift that area of work, of flood response, to volunteers where they can, even though these are sometimes Mickey Mouse outfits without proper training, without proper equipment, that actually possibly put people at greater danger by dealing with very hazardous situations without that proper training, planning and resources. But they would rather do that than actually negotiate with an organised workforce as we represent. So we have to discuss fighting back. And the trade union bill, of course, is another prong of that attack. And I have to say that it is prompted some of the sharpest debates in the TUC that I've ever seen in the decade that I have been on the TUC. The TUC is sometimes not the most inspiring of organisations, and the TUC General Council, I'm not giving away any trade secrets, is also not the most inspiring of bodies to sit on. But because I think of the very real issues that we're facing, some of those tensions are beginning to come out. And at the start of the debate about the trade union bill, one argument was used that actually our audience in this is the 300 plus Tory MPs. We've got to convince them, or the more reasonable ones, to actually make concessions, and that's where our focus should be. And then others of us within that debate said it is completely false. Our starting point has to be the 6.5 million people who are members of trade unions, and the other people who we think should be members of trade unions. And actually, if you organise them seriously, you've got a proper army, and actually possibly the so-called sensible Tories will start to have some dialogue with you on the basis of strength, not on the basis of pleading to their better nature. And that sort of, I think, sums up some of the tension that lies behind that and will continue, because there is now a setback in the House of Lords for the government, but the truth is they are going to be determined to force that attack through, and they're going to push it through. And the second question that we have raised in those discussions at the TUC is, what are we going to do next? Because they're not putting this legislation on the order paper simply to sit there and leave it there. They're putting it on the order paper in order to have a go at our organisations. And at some point, some union or some group of trade unionists is going to become a victim of that legislation. It might be over ballot thresholds, it might be over picketing, it might be over something else. And unless our movement is preparing now of what we're going to do, we will see those people picked off. And our argument in those discussions is we need to be preparing now for the sort of struggle that will back up people who come into conflict with that legislation, as they undoubtedly will. So as a complete, in reality, there's a difference of approach, a pretty fundamental difference of approach between some of us in the TUC and around that TUC General Council. And my view on that is, you don't have to be rude about it, but actually if we have disagreements, it's probably better to bring those disagreements out into the open and thrash it out and have a debate in front of trade union members, and let trade union members decide what sort of strategy they want to have in terms of taking on this legislation, or the alternative, keeping our heads down and effectively allowing our organisations to be fundamentally and seriously weakened industrially, politically and financially, which is their target. And I think that raises some questions about how we go about doing that. Because we have defeated anti-union legislation before. In 1971, most famously in recent decades. But we have to compare where we were then with where we are now. I'm not saying we're in the 1970s. We have seen our movement set back in terms of membership. We've seen the state of workplace organisation set back in terms of the number of workplaces who have organised shop stewards or union reps in them. So, but those are the strategic discussions we have to have about how we rebuild that movement. And in my view, you rebuild that movement around fighting, around campaigning, around struggle. You know, we saw the film there about fast food workers, and Ian will speak on that in more detail. But there is this debate, and all these terms are used: peripheral workers, marginal workers, and so on, and say they're very difficult to organise. And undoubtedly there are difficulties there. But if you look at the two of the biggest unions in our movement today, Unite and the GMB, and you look at their history, both of those organisations started out organising workers who were considered unorganisable, who were considered to be marginal in their days. The Bryant and Mays match girls, the Dockers, who at that time built mighty organisations but were seen at that point as being not possible to be organised because trade unions were for the elite. And it took people, and it also took people, by the way, with very radical ideas, with socialist ideas, to say, actually, we don't need to adopt the models that we've had in the past. So we need to think for today, what sort of models of organisation can we build today? Because I think we can rebuild trade union membership if we're building a fighting, organised, campaigning trade union movement, and we can rebuild workplace organisation. And both of those, I think, go hand in hand with trying to challenge the trade union, the anti-trade union attacks of the government, but also linking that to the fight against austerity. So I'll just finish with a couple of points. I think that we need to have a debate in our movement, setting out a number of key areas for discussion and to target. And one of those is about rebuilding strong, powerful, organised workplace organisation in our trade unions, rebuilding the shop stewards movement or the equivalent in modern workplaces. Secondly, in terms of actually going out and campaigning to rebuild our movement, organising people who are currently organised, and being unapologetic about making the case for trade unionism and linking that to actually issues like defending our NHS, because I think that is a hugely powerful story that millions and millions of people would rally behind. And finally, I think we do have to discuss politics within that, because the truth is that this is being done on the back of the crisis of 2007 and 2008. We have a government that is clearly pursuing, let's call things by the right name, a class agenda in the interests of their people, whereby they want the majority, in my view, the majority, the working class of our society, to pay the price for their system's failure. And if we let them get away with it, they will privatise our public services, they will privatise our NHS, and they will continue to drive down our living standards. So we need to discuss organisation and politics at the same time. Thanks very much.
Colleagues, sisters, brothers, I mean, it's only a brief statement. Obviously, I've prepared a speech because I thought you were going on strike next week, so I'll come down and do a bit of rebel rousing, but I'll save it for the next time. I'll save it for the next time when you're definitely going to go out on strike, and we'll be there in solidarity and support. In fact, I came to Darlington picket line. The only problem was there was 20 Bakers Union people, and you'd all gone to the pub. But we manned it manfully for you. But obviously, just to give you a brief update really about what happened last week on the fast food campaign. And I'd like to thank those people who came along, and obviously the people who supported the fast food campaign over the last 2 years. The campaign last week was, in our opinion, probably the most successful day of action that we've actually done. And the reason for the action last week was because we actually registered along with other trade unions led by the SEIU and the fast food workers in America a petition against McDonald's, which, if they're found guilty, will actually lead McDonald's to being potentially fined for $17 billion. We're hoping that's going to act as some sort of leverage to get them around the table to negotiate the opportunity to organise a trade union, or at the very least to make them reconsider the way that they act as an employer and as a business. But we also laid, as the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, a petition in relation to the use of 0 hours contracts in this country, and the fact that currently, if you're covered by the Working Time Directive, then you have a number of rights, but if you're on a 0 hours contract, unfortunately you're not covered by the Working Time Directive. And one of the things that we've been able to do with the McDonald's workers is give evidence that's enabled them to reconsider their position, and last week that laying of a petition means that there will now be a review. So all of those people who are on a 0 hours contract may find that in the future the legislation is changed to make sure that they're actually covered and have some rights under the Working Time Directive too. But also last week what was really interesting was the amount of young fast food workers who have recently joined our trade union that took part in that event, which included the evil Ronald McDonald's coming down and doing a tribute to David Bowie, dressed up as obviously the evil Ronald McDonald's. And for those that didn't see it on Twitter, they were described as the new Labour cabinet. And if you'd have seen them sat next to John McDonnell, perhaps we could have hoped for a better cabinet of the future. So in Boldworthy, after the event outside McDonald's in Trafalgar Square, which probably hates us more than any other McDonald's in the UK because of the number of times we've shut it down, that the number of people that were there decided that actually what we're going to do now is shut down Whitehall, and actually marched up Whitehall and shut off the streets. And we actually got a police escort, which was very nice of them, and they escorted us to make sure we got to Whitehall in a safe and a proper manner, and we weren't accosted over and over by any of the cars or buses that wanted to get by. So we thank the police for escorting us in a safe and appropriate manner. And obviously that was then led into a meeting with John McDonald and Dawn Butler. And what was really good to hear was obviously we, as a trade union, supported by the GMB at the TUC and then adopted by the TUC, put a call for a minimum wage of £10 an hour, and it was really good to hear John McDonnell say that under the Labour Party review they are now recommending that a minimum wage should be at least £10 an hour, and that will be the official policy of the Labour Party if it gets elected at the general election, or hopefully sooner. So we're really pleased to see a mainstream political party adopting that. Other than that, I think if you go on Twitter and have a look at the stuff that they've done, if you look at that Serving Up Change video, I mean, those are all young fast food workers under the age of 24 that's making that film. If you can take it back to your branches, if you can find some way of financially supporting them, then please do it, because I think that film will absolutely encourage people who may not have considered joining the trade union before, maybe to get involved with the trade union. Thank you for listening to me. Obviously, good luck, solidarity, both of you. You know, we're 100% behind you.
Welcome to Mandy Brown from Lambeth UCU. People will know her from the strikes in Lambeth that successfully saw off some of the cuts in the past, although I know you're facing more now. But Mandy was going to say something about the fight to defend the ESOL as a second language teaching, and the fight that we have to make sure that we don't let the government divide and rule at the moment. Mandy.
Thank you, Candy. Okay, yeah, thanks for letting me speak today. I'm actually speaking, I am on the UCU National Executive Committee, but I'm also an activist with Action for ESOL, which many of you may remember had a really successful campaign a few years ago when the government tried to introduce fees for students on benefits, and we had a massive U-turn. And once again, Action for ESOL has had to get its campaign off the ground and resurrect its campaign, because many of you, I'm sure, like me and like every single ESOL teacher or anyone who cares about what's happening with refugees in this country, will have been totally shocked and disgusted by Cameron's comments on Tuesday about the fact that migrant workers do not want to study English and that they should learn English to integrate. It's an absolute disgrace, and it's staggering hypocrisy that his government has cut ESOL funding by £160 million since 2008. Every single FE college up and down this country has seen their ESOL department slashed year after year. Now it's even twice a year. At the college where I work, we've gone down from 65 ESOL teachers to 31, and they came for us again after September when the government cut that JCP funding. They took another £45 million out of the ESOL budget, and then they stand up and they say they blame migrants for not wanting to study English. It's not migrant workers, it's their failed policies that are stopping people from learning English. And particularly, why target Muslim women? There are 850,000 people in this country, according to Demos and the government's own figures, who need English as a second language. That's Muslim women, Muslim men, Turkish women. Every single community group needs English and cannot access it because of the cuts that we've seen year and year and year. I've just come, actually, I'm late today because I was working at Lambeth College. We had an open day and we had to turn away every student that came to study. We were the busiest department in the college. Every other department was sitting 2 people in a room having a coffee. ESOL was once again, as it is in every college I know, overwhelmed. There were people coming through the door. There was nowhere for them to sit. They had to stand in the corridor. They had their children with them. Lots of women, lots of Muslim women, lots of every single other nationality women that want to learn English. And we had, from the minute they came in, we had a letter ready saying, sorry, the classes are full, you have to go away and play again in March. And it's been like that since I've worked there. We've had, once at Lambeth College, we had 3,000 people on our waiting list. And again, Cameron, in the summer, comes out and makes the claim, migrants are lazy, they don't want to learn, they don't want to integrate. Well, the truth is, they do want to learn, but they can't because of his cuts. And that's what's happening. So, yeah, so we've called, UCU London Region has called an emergency demonstration this Wednesday at 6 o'clock outside Downing Street. It's being supported by Stand Up to Racism and by LGBT schools groups and by Action for ESOL. So please come and join us. I mean, in my classes this week, I've spoke about what happened on Tuesday with my students. They're all going to come down, like the furore in the press. I mean, you can see what campaigning does. In UCU, we've had a lot of campaigns in the last year about the plight of FE and ESOL together. We've had some successful lobbies. We had a brilliant march down to the mayor's office with 1,500 people. This has really helped raise the profile of FE. When you read articles now about further education, they actually do know what further education is. They understand who our students are and what we teach, which they never did before. So, I can't remember why I was going to say that, but anyway, I think I'll finish there. Please come to the demonstration and pass the word. I hope there's some flyers around, but if not, they'll be emailed round. So thank you very much.
Finally, I'd like to call in Michael Bradley from Unite the Resistance, and then I'll open it back up for
I've just to come through. I mean, first of all, I thought what Matt said was the correct argument, really, that we've got to have a serious debate, really, about how we take on these issues. But when we don't need to just list the horrors. But I don't know if anybody else saw it. I was LBC at the minute are tweeting out a poll of their listeners to discuss the fact of a woman who committed suicide and has written a note and blamed it on the bedroom tax, right, and stuff. And this is the reality of what austerity means for us. And over the last couple of days, we've seen what's been happening in South Wales and stuff with the steel industry in Port Talbot. Well, over the last couple of weeks, 10,000 jobs have gone. And in a little matter, somebody raised the issue of housing earlier on and stuff over it. There's a beautiful little graph in the news the other night that shows wages and housing costs, right, and stuff over it. And there's no wonder people are going to be on the streets over the issue of housing and stuff, because we're simply being forced out of inner cities if you're a working class person. The response to the government, I mean, I don't need to go through the detail, well, because Mandy just did, but the fact that they are attempting divide and rule is increasingly clear, right, and stuff about it. Actually, the thing over the last couple of days that's really stood out, alongside Cameron's using the issue of ESOL, is the red doors in Middlesbrough. People have followed it, G4S, if you're a refugee, you get your door painted nice and red and stuff, so if somebody wants to bash your window in, right, and stuff, and they've known about this for 4 or 5 years. The government complained, the Labour government complained, right, and stuff, previously about the issue and stuff, and this is seen as in some way acceptable and stuff around it. And it seems to us, if we're going to talk about resistance seriously, right, at any level, and I'm going to go and talk about the trade union bill as well and stuff over it, we can't do that if we're divided. It's a simple equation, right, and stuff. Why are they stirring it up in Middlesbrough of all places? Because there's mass unemployment in Middlesbrough, and it's easier to blame bloody refugees than it is to blame Tata Steel or the government for refusing to step in and stuff about it. And it's brilliant today, by the way, Diane Abbott and other people are out there in Calais. It's really got, it's a breath of fresh air to have a Labour Party now that is prepared to take up the issue of refugees rather than chiming in and stuff in the way that they did, that happened during the general election. And obviously, all the debates that we're having at the moment have to happen under a new set of circumstances, and that's over a couple of things. And the simple thing is the difference at the moment that the issue of Jeremy Corbyn is making, right, and stuff about it. The fact you've got John McDonnell and stuff over the last couple of days talking about the possibilities of workers buying out their workplaces and controlling them is slightly different, we all know, than Labour policy after the last 20 years and stuff. And it means that all the arguments that we're putting here are no longer the arguments of a small minority, right, and stuff. They're arguments that are growing, right, and stuff around this. And we've really got to be able to think about how we drive these arguments through and stuff. And particularly when you think about the restrictions on the trade unions, the fact we've had the leader of the Labour Party turn up on national TV and say, first of all, offered support to workers here who are in struggle, but then secondly said that the idea of sympathy strikes, this outrageous idea that you should be able to support somebody else in another workplace and stuff, should be allowed and stuff, really. And this is good. This is all good ground for us. It's brilliant ground for us and stuff. And actually, there are more signs of hope than this, isn't there, really? Because we've done crazy things at the minute, like win victories, right, and stuff over it. Put Candice on the platform. She got a job back through strike action. Sandy Nicol is in the audience of this meeting today from SOAS. He got his job back, right, and stuff after a victory and stuff around it. Actually, when there are tube workers in the audience, people might have different versions of what they think the deal is, right, and stuff on London Underground. But it's certainly the case that the threat of industrial action is rocking management in the same way as the reason why the government is now offering talks to junior doctors, right, and stuff, is for the same reason and stuff. And since the elections, we haven't just seen our side retreat back. We've seen mass protest. I mean, people talked about it, the mass People's Assembly protest that followed the general election, the fact that we've had junior doctors and student nurses out in their thousands on the streets and the rest of it and stuff. This is a massive advance for us, really. And that's in the circumstances why I think you're getting increasingly a feeling now and stuff that we can start rolling things back. I think you see it when people are victimised. Actually, before the election, people lost their job as a rep and the rest of it, and there was a kind of inevitability about it. Now, in some ways, it's kind of like a habit-forming thing. They sack a rep, you produce a little pack which says reinstate them, they get reinstated. There may even be a little action thing later on and stuff for Simon O'Hara, who's a rep who's just been dismissed up in Birmingham and stuff. It's not a sad story. You look at pictures of Birmingham Town Hall today, there are union banners stretched across here, there's people all over the movement beginning to rally round. This is because our side starts to feel that it's possible to make a change. And under these bases is when we talk about what the Tories are trying to do with the trade union bill. Because they're worried about a basic thing. They're worried that the mood that exists against them in society can focus itself in industrial action. And it doesn't matter how many times we look at the weaknesses of our side, they look at the weaknesses of their side. And they remember the mass strikes that happened under the Tory government, under the coalition. They remember there were 2.5 million people out on strike at one stage. And they also remember the stuff that Matt brought up, that in the past, our movement has been out to tore Tory governments down through the power that trade unions have and stuff. And that's why they're trying to introduce the trade union bill, right, and stuff. And people have to be really clear about the trade union bill. If it goes through and it's pushed and implemented, it is the biggest attack on the trade union movement for generations. And the fact that when the BMA called for support, for basic support for their dispute, right, and stuff, not calling for people to take secondary action or anything of the kind, just support, the fact you can have the threat of legal action against people shows you how far they will go once that bill comes through. So what do we do? Right, because to be honest with you, this is the big question. Now, the first thing is, the trade union movement has bloody good policy on a trade union bill. The TUC has voted to support generalised strikes to defend any trade union that finds itself outside the law. Unite, which is the biggest union in Britain, has removed the term legal from its rule book, so it can take illegal action, as it were, if it wants to. This is all really positive, right? But, come on, we all know there's a gap between what's passed at a trade union conference and the fact that within months, despite the setback in the Lords, that we can have this legislation turn into reality. So we've got to talk seriously about what we do about that gap. And actually, I'd like to pay tribute to people, to unions like the Bakers Union and to the FBU and to individuals like Mark Sawatka and other people who have tried to push the pace of the resistance to the trade union bill. They've tried to say it's not enough to pass motions, and that's why they've been calling lobbies, they've been campaigning, they've been trying to push for a much more developed response and stuff about it. Now, to be honest with you, like Ian or anybody else who's spoken and stuff, what we'd all like to happen here is for the TUC to enact its own policy. Right, and stuff. And to be honest with you, if 6.5 million people were called out on strike, the trade union bill would last 20 minutes. That's the truth of it, right? Stuff. But be honest with you, we know there's a gap that exists. So what do? I think the thing is we have to use any opportunity now, alongside the developing solidarity around other disputes and campaigns and the rest of it. I will get to do this in 2 minutes, Candy. Don't worry, right? Stuff about it, right? To start moving towards the reality of what I think we need to do, which is talking about defiance of the law. The TUC has called a week of action. 18th to the 14th of February, which is in the middle of the action that the student nurses and a BMA are calling. Now, the two dates that Candy talked about, the 9th and the 11th of February, within that, are very important. Right, stuff, the TUC are calling for every workplace in Britain to hold lunchtime meetings on the 9th of February. Now, it doesn't sound the most radical thing, right, stuff, but let's be honest about it. If every workplace in Britain did it, this would be a step forward. The second thing is, everybody should read the text of what the TUC has put out to do on the 11th of February, because it's very interesting, right, stuff. What it says is you should hold lunchtime rallies and think about a walkout. Now, I'm sure that whoever drafted that didn't necessarily mean it in the same way that some of us would, right? But it certainly does open up a discussion, particularly in a week where student nurses will be walking out, about whether we in our own workplaces can start to push that little bit and to start making real the idea of defiance of the law. I don't know if people remember this far back, but once the TUC called a 15-minute strike in support of the ambulance workers. If dozens of workplaces around London came out for 15 minutes on top, right, and stuff of a lunchtime, it would start to open up a real discussion. And in lots of ways, really, I think that's what's really interesting about what Matt and other people have raised. We've got to talk about how we break the gap between rhetorical statements against the bill and the attacks on us and the reality of developing a movement which is confident enough to defy the law. Over the last couple of weeks, by the way, we've seen some examples of defying the law. Up in Sellafield, hardly anybody even noticed it. Thousands of workers took unofficial action and won a dispute. Didn't even make the papers, actually, to be honest with you. It made the Financial Times, nowhere else. But let's look at the other things. How did Sandy Nicol get his job back? Not because he's a wonderful person, because Sandy can drive you mad sometimes as much as anybody else can, right? I suppose, right? Because UCU members and Unison members walked out. Right, stuff. By the way, did Sally Hunt or Dave Prentice end up in court because of it? Was the union sequestrated because of it? No. But the result is that Sandy's got his job back. At Bridgewater, postal workers walked out in defence of a disabled Asian worker, right, and stuff over it. It was a magnificent strike, right, and stuff over it, right? And by the way, Dave Ward is still walking around. I've seen Twitter reports of a meeting he's speaking at today. Lambeth Library workers did the same. See, the point of the anti-union laws, we all know, in reality, they are as strong as we allow them to be. It's about the confidence and the organisation of our side to push against them. Just to finish, really, is this, that over the next couple of weeks, really, and stuff, we've got some important things to do. So all of us know, where do we want to be in 2020? We want a situation where we turn on our TV sets and Jeremy's walking into number 10 and John's walking into number 10. We all want to see that happen, but there's a long time before that could happen. 4 long years before that's to happen. If you want to make that a possibility, the movement outside is the key argument. And therefore, one, we have to mobilise. I mean, Candy went through the dates, but yes, we want to be on the People's Assembly protest. We want to be demonstrating against racism on the 19th of March. We want to be pulling people onto the streets over housing. Actually, on Wednesday, I think that East Old protest is really bloody important. The fact that Muslim women are being targeted in that way, we need to hit straight back. And so we won't allow it. But in the end, alongside that, we have to use our biggest weapon. And our biggest weapon is the strike weapon. Our biggest weapon is industrial action combined with a political movement alongside it. That's why the Tories are terrified of the trade unions. That's why they call them dinosaurs, but they spend their entire time trying to use legislation to bind them up, because a mass movement that goes onto the streets as a political element and can use the power of strike action against them could break austerity. And that's why we have to talk about, first of all, defending our right to strike, but there is the best way to defend the right to strike is to use it. And that's what the student nurses are showing us by the call for what is effectively unofficial action. That's what the BMA have shown us and stuff, and it's a more generalised argument we've got to put across our class. If we're going to defend the right to strike, if we're going to break the trade union bill, we have to use industrial action, official if we can, but we have to build a movement that's able to use unofficial action if it's necessary.